In this video, we're going to use everything that we've learned in previous lessons to model this hard drive. I have one of these sitting on my desk, and I thought it would make for a good hard surface modeling challenge. And if you really want to test yourself, try modeling it on your own before watching this video. Since it's pretty boxy already, let's just start with our default cube. Since this is an object that you might want to put into a scene with different objects that you want to be in correct proportion with, let's just model it to real-world scale. I'll hit 1 on the number pad to jump to front view, and then N to open up the sidebar. When I measured mine, it came out to 23.5 centimeters by 13 centimeters by 7 centimeters. So let's type that in. For the x-axis, I'll type in 13 cm. For the y-axis, I'll type in 23.5 cm. And for the z-axis, I'll type in 7 cm. If we actually want to see these values in centimeters rather than in meters, then we can go to the scene properties, down to units, and switch the length from meters to centimeters. Or also we could set it to adaptive, which is my favorite. That way we can work in meters, kilometers, millimeters, anything we want. Then I'll select the object and hit period on my number pad to zoom right to it. And the first part of this that I want to model is the shell that wraps all the way around. One of the attributes of it is that it's perfectly symmetrical both front to back and from side to side. So I'll hit tab to go into edit mode and hit Control R to add an edge loop running down the length of it. And then I'll add one on the side as well. Control R and left click twice to place it. Then I can go to X-ray view and select all of the vertices not in the front right corner. So all of those around the back and the side, and hit delete and vertices. Now I can go to my modifiers tab, add modifier, generate and mirror. I'll mirror along both the X and the Y axes, and now we don't have to do nearly as much work. The first thing I'll do is delete this front face. So I'll go to face select mode by hitting 3 on the top row of number keys, select that face, and delete faces. Then I'll go to edge select mode, select this edge right here in the middle, and hit G and X and move that in along the X axis. Now for all of these sub details, like how far the feet jut in underneath the device, I'm just going to eyeball it, but if I was doing this for a client, then I definitely want to be exact. But now that we have the bottom cutout, let's also make the cutout on the bottom of the side. So I'll hit Control R and add an edge loop going vertically, and I'll slide this over to the front, somewhere around there. And then I'll also hit Control R again and make a loop cut that goes right down the side. Then I just need to make one more loop cut here on the bottom, somewhere about there. And then I'll go to face select mode and delete these two newly created faces. Delete and faces. All right, now most of our shape is there, and I can hit Z and toggle off X-ray. And the next thing that we need to do is round out the main edges. I'll do that with a bevel modifier rather than in edit mode, just so that we can always adjust it later. So I'll go to object mode, add modifier, generate, and bevel. Here we can change the width, and it'll go all the way until it juts into the bottom here. Though if I increase the segments, let's go to something like 12, so it's nice and smooth. If I go to front view, and let's go to wireframe view so we can actually see this, you'll notice that the curve of the bevel is not perfectly rounded. It's pretty stretched out. And that's because we didn't apply our scale after we shrunk it down to the correct size. So in order to fix the shape of the bevel, we need to apply our scale. I'll go to Object, Apply, and Scale. There we go. Now the scale that was part of the object properties has been applied to the vertices themselves. This also means that we need much less of a bevel. If we go to our geometry and turn off clamp overlap, then that's going to go haywire, but we can also just turn down the amount until it looks about right. We just don't want it to overlap down here at the bottom. But again, I can always turn on clamp overlap, and now I don't have to worry about it. So I'll go to about 2 centimeters there. And now I'd also like to round out the sharp corners. And I can do that by beveling the vertices. So I'll add a second bevel modifier for that, by going to add modifier and bevel again. And this one I'll set to vertices. I definitely don't want to bevel all of the vertices though, so let's set the limit method to weight, hit tab to go into edit mode, and select only the vertices that we want to round out. The first one that I'll choose is this corner here. I'll go back to solid view so we can see it, and then in the sidebar under vertex data, I'll take the bevel weight and increase that to 1. Now if I change the amount, it's going to appear stuck even though we have plenty of space before it hits the other vertices. What's happening, and we can see this if we go back to wireframe view, is that since this vertex has a bevel weight of 1, and this vertex has a bevel weight of 0, all of the newly created vertices from this bevel modifier are blended in between those. So all we need to do is just drag this second bevel, and I'll rename it to vertex bevel. I'll drag it up above the other one so that it happens first, and that'll fix the issue. So I'll set this to about 2.2 centimeters, or maybe let's just go an even 2 centimeters, something like that. And then I'll increase the segments. Let's go with 16. Then for the other two sharp corners, I'll select those vertices. It's just these two. And then I'll take the bevel weight and increase them, but not all the way to 1. I'll just do something fairly slight, like 0.2. The only other thing that we need to do for this piece is add some thickness. So I'll collapse all of these modifiers to save some space, and then go to Add Modifier and Solidify. I did actually measure this one and found out that it's about 2 millimeters, so I'll type that in and hit Enter. I'll also turn on Even Thickness for good measure, though I don't think it makes too much of a difference in this case. Then to finish it off, I'll go to Object Mode, right-click, and Shade Auto Smooth. That way it smooths out the big bevels while keeping the front angles nice and sharp. I could add yet another bevel modifier to create a very slight bevel that goes all the way around these sharp edges, but since that's so small, it would be better to do that in the shader instead if we can. So even though we won't be talking about rendering this, since that's a completely separate topic, we should at least go up to the Shading tab, look for the principled BSDF in the node editor, and plug a bevel node into the normal. We can drag out from the normal and type in bevel. Then I'll zoom in here, hit period on my number pad, and remember that we can only see this in cycles. So I'll go to the render properties, which is the back of the camera icon, switch the render engine over to cycles, and switch over to the rendered preview. I'll also switch over to GPU compute so my fan noise won't be overpowering. This looks pretty bad so far, but that's because our radius is really big. I think this is in meters, though it doesn't explicitly say, but if I set this to something much smaller, like 0.001, then that's a bit better. We can see this more clearly if we take the metallic value and slide that up. And now we can see this very slight bevel that goes all the way around. If we want to increase the quality of that, we can bump up the samples in the bevel node. Let's go with something like 8, and that looks a lot better. And for a bevel that just needs to be ever so slight, I think this works perfectly. So let's go back to the Layout tab, and now let's save our file and work on the grid of holes that makes up the front and the sides. It'll be easier to work with the different disconnected pieces of this as separate objects, but instead of creating a new object, I'm just going to steal a face from this one. That way it has the same material and all of the same modifiers. So I'll hit Tab to go into Edit mode here, and I'll just take all of the top vertices, Shift D to duplicate them, and then I'll go to Mesh, Separate, and Separate by Selected. Then if I go to Object mode, I can select this separately, tab into Edit mode on this object, and first I'll just extrude it all the way down. So E to extrude, Z to constrain it to the Z axis, and pull it down. For now, I'll disable some of these modifiers, and even get rid of the vertex bevel since we won't need that one. But I'll also hide the solidify, and let's look at the bevel. First of all, we don't want it beveling around the front here, and also we don't want it beveling towards the bottom. So let's switch the limit method from angle to weight. Now it's also overlapping with the shell, so I'll go to front view, Z, and toggle on X-ray, take these side vertices, and hit G and X and move those along the X-axis. If there's a little bit of a gap, that's perfectly fine since there's a gap on the actual object, but if you wanted to snap that, then you could as well. The top vertices, I'll hit G and Z, and move them down until there's just a tiny gap there too. Then to bevel just this top edge, I'll select both of those two edges, and over in the sidebar, turn up the bevel weight to 1. It doesn't quite match the shell because we had clamp overlap turned on for that one, so I'll go into front view and adjust the amount until it matches right up, about 7 millimeters. That's all we need to do with the bevel modifier, so I'll collapse that, and let's turn on the smooth by angle. Then, you might notice in the reference that the shell has a little bit of a lip to it, and it doesn't quite line up perfectly with this front face. So I'll go to face select mode and select that front face, hit G and Y, and pull it in ever so slightly along the Y axis. Just a little bit. Then as a little bit of cleanup, since this edge loop isn't doing anything at all, I'll go ahead and Alt left click to select it, and hit delete and edge loops. Then I'll go back to front view and pull these bottom vertices down until it meets just where this arc starts. So I'll hit G and then Z and pull it down until it's just about to start running into the side. I also noticed, more so while feeling this while picking it up rather than looking at it, is that this bottom edge has a little bit of a bevel as well. Not a big one, but it's there. So I'll select these two edges and turn up the mean bevel weight to something really, really small. I'll look at this from front view, and I would say about 0.1 or 0.15 looks about right. So let's stick with that. Also in X-ray view, if we go to face select mode, we can see that we have these interior faces, which we definitely don't want. That can mess with our shading and loop cuts and everything like that. So let's go ahead and delete those faces. This part of the object is pretty simple, so there's not much else we need to do there. I'll turn off X-ray, and really we just need to now make those hole punch cutouts. The easiest way by far to do that is with the Boolean modifier. So let's first add a cylinder to make those little hole punch cutouts. I'll hit Shift-A, add mesh and cylinder, and then under the add cylinder options, I'll reduce the vertices count to 8. Since we're going to be making a lot of these, and Booleans are kind of an expensive operation, the more vertices we give this, the slower everything is going to run. Though maybe 8 isn't quite enough if we want to do some close-ups. So I'll set it to 10, but you can set it to more or less depending on what your computer can handle. Then I'll go ahead and scale this down to be really, really small. But I did measure these, and the hole is about 2 millimeters in diameter. So let's take the X and Y axes here and just set those both to 2 millimeters. And then I'll move this out towards the front by hitting G and Y. I'll go to side view here and rotate this 90 degrees. And then scale it in along the Y axis. So it's a little tiny hole punch. And then before we forget, let's go ahead and hit Control A and apply scale. Then I'll hit G and Y and move this until it's intersecting the front face. Then so we can see through it, I'll go to my object properties, down towards viewport display, and set the display as to wire. Now we need to arrange these into an array. So the array modifier is our friend here. Let's go to the modifiers tab, add modifier, and choose array. There are 23 holes in the top row, so I'll set the count to 23. Look at this from front view. Move the first one into the top left corner, and just increase the factor X until it spreads out throughout the entire thing. Looking at it now, these actually look a little bit too big in comparison to the reference, so I must not have been very careful when I was looking at it with the ruler. Let's actually go ahead and change this back to 1 to 1.5 millimeters. Though I can't really do that now because the dimensions actually take into account the array. So first I need to disable the array and then set both the X and Y to, let's say, 1 millimeter. That seems a little bit too small, so let's go 1.5 millimeters. And that's close enough. Okay, then I'll enable the array again, and I can spread these out a little bit more. They kind of start where the curve starts, and also pretty near the top. So I'll move these up along the Z, and then move them along the X. And if we go into wireframe view, we can actually line this up pretty well with the side of the bevel. And then over on the right, I'll just change the factor X and pull that in just ever so slightly as well. Okay, that looks pretty good. And then we can do another array to array this along the Z axis. So I'll just take this and hit duplicate. But for this one, instead of going along the X axis, I'll set that to 0. We want to go negative along the Z axis. Though in this case, rotation hasn't been applied, so it's going to be doing it in its local Z axis, not the global Z. So I could either pick whichever one is the local axis, or I could hit Control A and apply rotation. All right, then I'll go to front view, and let's turn the count way down. Let's just go to 10 for now. And if we space this out, this is looking pretty good, but it's also an even grid. In the reference, every other row is shifted over a bit. So we could add a second one in edit mode by tabbing into edit mode, selecting everything, and then hitting Shift D and duplicating this over, and then trying to space that out properly. Or what I think would be a bit easier is just taking this whole object and hitting Alt D to create a linked duplicate, and then just shifting this over to the left a little bit, just like so, and then going to the array along the X-axis and adding one more. So we can try to line this up as as best we can along the x-axis, and then also move it up along the z-axis. So it looks like they're pretty close together, something like that. And then we can change the height along the z to match. So I'll take the relative offset along the z and move that up to about -2.8. I'll set that value exactly, and then I'll hover over the value and hit Control-C to copy it, and then just paste it right into the z for the other object. And now they match up exactly. Then I'll just increase the count for both of these until we run into the bottom. Before we go any further, it is bothering me a little bit that this bevel isn't quite exact. There's a little bit too much space there, and maybe I'm being a little bit too picky, but we can go ahead and fix that by going over to the bevel modifier, holding down Shift so we're working in really small increments, and try to get that as close as possible, though it doesn't look like it's going to let us do it. So let's go 7.25 millimeters. Nope, needs to go in the other direction. Let's go 6.5 millimeters, 6.75. Okay, there we go. I'll be happy with that. But now that we have all these little hole punches, we can use the Boolean modifier and subtract them from the other object. So let's select the main body, and I'll collapse all these modifiers, and then let's add modifier and Boolean. Then since we're also going to be doing this on the side, and we might add some other Booleans later on, I don't want to have to add a Boolean for every single object. So instead, I'll create a collection. I'll just go to Scene Collection, Add New, and I'll call this one Hole Punch Bools. I'll take both of these objects and move them into the Hole Punch Bools collection. And then I can select this object, set the type from Object to Collection, and choose the Hole Punch Bools as the collection. That operation might be a little slow depending on your PC and how many vertices you've used, but if we go ahead and hide these Hole Punch Bools now, we can see we've punched this out really well. We can try the fast operation, and it looks like that actually worked pretty well. That'll definitely help speed things up. When I was testing this before though, it didn't always work because some of these lined up with the edge directly in the middle. So if that's the case and you can't shift these off to the side so that they're not lining up with the edges, then you can set this to the exact method. But again, that's going to be much slower. Now, one thing that's bugging me a little bit is the shading on the inside of the holes. I'd like that to be completely smooth. Usually when dealing with the Boolean modifier, we'd want to go to the bool object and smooth the outside of our cylinders. But in this case, we're using a smooth by angle modifier after the Boolean modifier, and that's going to override the shading with those new settings. So let's just go to our smooth by angle modifier and increase the angle until the result is completely smooth. Here's also where I need to decide whether I want to use the solidify modifier or not, because without the solidify modifier, this is just going to punch this inwards and there will be a solid wall in the back. But with the solidify modifier, if this is sufficiently thin, and let's offset it on a value of 1, then you can see that it becomes hollow on the inside and we punch all the way through. So this is without the solidify modifier, and this is with. In this case, I don't think it makes too much difference for rendering. I'm not going to be modeling the inside of these components, so I'll go ahead and leave the solidify modifier off and just collapse it for now. But if you do want to model anything inside of there, then you can enable that pretty easily. Now let's go ahead and duplicate these hole punches over to the side. But before we do that, we should start to name our objects, because right now it's getting to be a little bit of a mess when everything is just named cube and cylinder. So I'll take the shell, and I'll name that shell. I'll name this main piece body, and I'll name both of these cylinders hole punch. Then I'll make a new collection. I'll select the scene collection first so it goes inside that one, and I'll rename this collection hard drive. Then I'll take the body and the shell, hold down Control to select both of those in a list, and I'll move those into the hard drive, as well as the hole punch bools. Okay, then I can also disable this collection since I don't need to see the camera or the lights at the moment. And let's go ahead and duplicate these hole punches, but before we do that, I'll turn off the Boolean modifier, and that way our viewport's not going to try to update that as we're duplicating and moving these around. So it'll just make things a little bit faster to work with if we turn that off. So I'll select both of those, hit 7 to go to top view. It looks like I accidentally selected the body as well. So I'll hit B and middle mouse button and drag to deselect that. And then for these, again, I'll hit Alt-D to create a linked duplicate, rotate 90 degrees in the negative direction from top view, and move these over to the side. Then I'll hit 3 to go to side view, and just move it so that the top and left edges line up. I'll hold down Shift so that I can work more precisely and line it up like so. Then I'll take one of these and just go and reduce the count. I'll do the same thing here until it fits. I'll leave a little bit of space there at the bottom for the bevel, and then I'll go to the array for the X and increase that until we hit the other side. And I'll do the same thing on this one. Okay, perfect. Maybe I'll move these over just a little bit along the y-axis so that they're centered. Move them just a little bit along the z, but that looks pretty good. Okay, now let's actually make sure that they are punching in to the same degree as the other side. So I'll move these in along the x-axis to about there. And maybe these are sticking in a little bit too much. So I'll move those out along the y-axis, just like so. And since they're already part of the hole punch bools collection, we can just go ahead and take our object and enable the Boolean modifier. Let's double check that the fast method actually works here on the side as well. So we'll go ahead and take the hole punch bools and hide that. And that actually worked really, really well. Again, when I was testing this before, there were times where it did not work, but that's because I had some edge loops running through like this. And every once in a while, I'd have to actually try to get these to line up. But if this lines up with one of those vertices, then it might not work. Again, here it actually seems to work pretty well. But if it doesn't for whatever reason, then go ahead and use the exact method. Just know that it will be quite a bit slower in this case because we're working with so many different little pieces. But now that this part is complete, I can go ahead and safely disable the hole punch bools collection. I don't really need to be looking at them anymore, and we can move on to the final pieces. Next, I'll add the detail of the light and the logo on the front. This would be pretty difficult to join in with all of these holes, so let's just add it on top. I'll hit Shift-A, Mesh, and Cube, and scale that down. Then I'll pull it along the y-axis until it's sitting out front. And the part that has the letter is roughly square, and then there's just a little bit of a rectangle below it. So I'll scale this down just a little bit more and place it somewhere around there. Then I'll snap this to the side by switching over to vertex snapping, moving this along the y-axis, and then holding Control and hovering my mouse over one of the vertices of the hole punch. Then I'll hit Tab to go into edit mode, 3 to go to face select mode, and let's pull this front face along the y-axis as well, and this one I'll pull to the lip that goes all the way around. Then I'll take the bottom face, hit E to extrude it along the z-axis, hold down Control, and then snap that to the bottom by hovering over vertex in the bottom left corner. It looks like the rectangle on the bottom is just a little bit too thick, so then I'll go toggle X-ray by holding down Z, select all of these faces, and just pull it down until it's about the right size. Again, I'm just eyeballing it this time. Then I'll turn off X-ray, and then the material that makes up the bottom light actually wraps around to the back here. So the way that I'll do that is hit Control-R and add a loop cut running vertically all the way around, Enter to confirm, and then to make just a tiny lip, I'll go to face select mode, select the bottom face, and E to extrude just ever so slightly. And then so that we can see the visual separation of these two materials, I'll go over to the Materials tab and click the drop down and choose the already existing material. This one I'll call hard drive, silver. And then I'll add a new material slot, assign a new material to it. This one I'll call hard drive light. And then assign it to everything except this little square in the front. So select that, switch to hard drive light, and click assign. We can visually differentiate these by going down to viewport display, cranking up the color for the light one, and then taking hard drive silver and making that just a little bit darker. Then in object mode, then we can see the difference. Okay, that's looking a little bit thick, so let's go to side view here. 1 to go to vertex select mode, and move this in just a little bit. Okay, and then I do want to bevel the 4 corners of the overall rectangle, So I'll go to the modifiers tab, add modifier, and bevel. I'll set the limit method to weight, tab into edit mode, and let's select these edges that go all the way around. That one, and that one, this one, and this one. Over in the sidebar, go to edges data and mean bevel weight, and turn that all the way up. Now this isn't going to work perfectly. Oh, it looks like I did miss one. Let's turn that up. Also because I did not apply scale after I finished scaling this down. So let's hit Control A and apply scale. That way our bevel is even and corresponds with the actual size here in the modifier. And I'll turn the size down to something pretty small. Let's go with 1 millimeter. Turn up the segments. And then let's also right click and shade auto smooth. Okay, perfect. Now for the label on the front, instead of a G, I'll put in a B for Blender. So I'll shift right click to place my 3D cursor right in the center there. And actually this origin is way off the object now. And that's not really a bad thing. It's not going to hurt anything, but it is kind of bad practice. So I'll go to Object, Set Origin, and Origin to Geometry. There we go. And then I can Shift S, Cursor to Selected. And that way when I add a new object, it gets added right in the middle there. Then I'll hit Shift A and add a text object, which is another object that we haven't looked at yet. And right now it's absolutely huge. But text objects in Blender are really easy to work with. We just need to hit Tab to go into text edit mode. I can backspace, and then I'll just make a capital B. Hit Tab to go back to object mode. 3 to go to side view. Rotate 90 degrees negative so that it's upright and facing forwards, and scale that down. I'll go to front view, period on my number pad, and then let's go to the text properties, down to paragraph and alignment, and set that to center. All right, then I'll put it right in the middle here. And if we want to give this a little bit of thickness, then we can actually just go to geometry in the text properties and extrude this just like so. Okay, so this works. The Blender font isn't known for being the most attractive, so it's usually good to change this out to something else. So we can also go to font and switch out the regular font. In this case, I'll just use Bauhaus 93. I don't remember where I got that one, but you can choose whatever font you'd like. And there we go. Next, let's add the little feet at the bottom, which just connect the main body to the part that sits on the floor. So let's hit Shift A, add mesh and cylinder. This one I can leave at 32 vertices. That seems about right since we're working reasonably high poly here, but I will scale this down just like so. And then to go to bottom view, I'll hold down Control and hit 7 on the number pad. So you can think of Control as just the opposite of whatever view you hit. And then I'll place this right behind the front foot. And then I'll make it just slightly less wide than the overall width of this section here. Then I'll pull that down and make sure that it's sitting directly on that piece. Control A and apply scale, since we will be using a bevel here. Tab to go into edit mode. Z to toggle on X-ray. Take this top face, drag that down, hold down Control and snap that to a vertex on the bottom of the main body. Tab to go to object mode. Z to toggle off X-ray. And now we just need to go to modifiers, add modifier and bevel, and add a very slight bevel, something like that, about 1 millimeter, and then right click and shade auto smooth. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And let's just mirror that over to the other sides. So let's go to add modifier, generate and mirror. But it's going to mirror it around the object origin. But in this case, I want it to mirror to the other side of the hard drive. So I can actually set the mirror object to the body of the hard drive or the shell, either one. And as long as the origin of the body is right in the center, then it'll mirror it perfectly over there. And I can mirror this on both the X and the Y axes. There we go. And we also need one here in the middle. So I'll hit Alt-D, duplicate this, Y to slide this along the Y axis. And then I want it to be exactly in the middle here. So I'll just set the y location to be 0. And then I don't want it to be mirrored over on the other side of the y-axis because now they're doubled up. So I'll just uncheck y from the axis in the mirror modifier, and there we go. There are also tiny little feet that are below this, little rubber pads that this can sit on a desk. So I can tab into edit mode here. And since I did an Alt-D and instanced the object data, if I make a change to any part of this, it'll change all of them. So what I can then really easily do is select this bottom face here, 1 to go to front view, Shift-D, Z to duplicate that down, and then to make that little foot, I'll just hit S to scale, make that a bit smaller, E, extrude that along the Z-axis, and scale that down a bit more. Now I don't want as much bevel over here, so I'll just make it a new object and get rid of the bevel modifier by selecting that whole portion, going to P, or the object menu, and separate by selection. Now I can go to object mode, select the foot, and get rid of the bevel modifier. So just by stealing it from this foot, it automatically keeps the mirror, though by separating it, it's no longer part of this foot and no longer in the middle. So I can again just Alt-D, move this along the y-axis, set the y location to 0 so that it's right in the middle, and just make sure that it's no longer mirrored on the y-axis. With that, I'll go to solid view, and our hard drive is now complete. Though we should do a little bit of cleanup because the new objects that we've created are a bit messy. So I'll take these little nubs here, and I'll call all of these legs, and I'll call the little nubs nubs. I'll call the text logo, and I'll call the cube light. Then I'll take all of these objects and parent them to the shell, since that's the outermost one and the one that's easiest to select. I'll hold down Shift, drag and drop those onto the shell object. And now if I select the shell, I can easily move this entire thing around, though the hole punches aren't going to come with it, so then we also need to parent those. So I'll take all of the hole punches, hold down Shift while dragging in the outliner, and parent those to the shell as well. Okay, then I can disable this collection again, and move this around. It's going to be really slow because it's going to try to update the Booleans during the movement. So if you're completely finished with the Booleans, then you can go ahead and apply all of these modifiers. But since I'm not really going to be doing any animation with this, I'll go ahead and leave it as is. Now there's one part of the hard drive that we're not going to get into, and that is the back. Because in order to make the fan that's back here, that requires some information that we're going to talk about in the next chapter that we haven't talked about yet. But one thing that you can do that I think would be a good challenge is to try making some of the ports. I'll show you the method for doing that really quick, and then you can add the others on your own if you feel so inclined. To add those, I'll just Boolean them into the body by going to Shift-A and adding a cube. And then I'm going to add a Boolean around the area that I'm going to place the socket in. So first I'll add a cube. That's like roughly the right size. And I'll poke that right in here. And then I'll Shift-D and duplicate this. And one of them is going to be the socket. So I'll call one socket, and the other one I'll call socket bool. And the socket bool object, I'll go to the object properties, display as wire, and then I'll hide the socket just for now. And let's go to our body, modifiers, and let's add another Boolean modifier. And choose that socket bool as the object. I can just drag and drop that from the outliner. And there we go. You can see how it's just punched right in. We can also set this to fast. You can see that actually gives us a better result in this case, because otherwise we'd have to turn on hole tolerant, and that's going to be much slower on this mesh. But now that I have this hole, maybe I'll push this in just a little bit more. I can go back to the original socket object, hit tab to go into edit mode, take this front face, and line this up. And I'm not going to worry about lining it up exactly because on the actual object, it's slightly offset just from not perfect manufacturing precision. And then to make the hole, I'll go to back view by hitting Control and 1 on the number pad. Control R to add 2 edge loops. S and X to scale that a little bit along the X-axis. And then I'll add 1 edge loop right about there, and then another edge loop right below it. Then I can take both of these edges and scale those out along the X-axis. and then add one more edge loop towards the bottom. That way I have this little house-like shape, or like a chimney. And let's see, I don't want all the rest of this geometry behind, so I'll take those vertices and just delete them to make this a little bit easier to work with. And then I'll take all three of these faces and just extrude them along the y-axis. Then I'll take this main face and this one above, I to inset, and these are going to be the little parts that stick back out. So then I can roughly make sure they're the right size. I'll scale this one down a little bit more. I'll take that one and scale it along the Z, and then take both of them and extrude them back out. Tab to go into object mode, Z to go back to solid shaded view, and there we have our plug. We can give this a different material or get more detailed if we want to, but that's what the process looks like. I can also take the Boolean, shift select the plug part, Control P, set parent to object, and that way we don't actually have to look at the bool. We can go ahead and hide that as well as hide it from the render. And then no matter where I place this, I can update this pretty quickly. Again, since the other Boolean is also live at the same time, this is going to be a little bit slow to move around. But I can place this wherever I want, and it gets cut out perfectly. So go ahead and add the other ports and power button this exact same way if you'd like, but that's where I'll leave it off for this tutorial. Once you feel like you've gotten the hang of basic hard surface modeling from this chapter, head on to the next chapter where we'll talk about some really important foundational concepts that will allow you to model even more complex objects.